There is no dichotomy here, there is no indifference that should we go to Oxford or should we not go to Oxford. Can one maintain one's faith by going to Oxford or not? Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam's very first Quranic verse that he received from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala explained to mankind the concept of knowledge in Islam. Because up until that point, if we look at the history of education within different civilizations and empires, the idea that your knowledge should lead you to your Creator was lost. The very first revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent to the best of creation sallallahu alayhi wasallam to revive this concept was to read the name of your Lord. So any learning of any type, irrespective of the science of that particular study, irrespective of the profession being to his or her Lord. So the question being asked, where in our equation of wishing for a career path for our child does Allah come into the equation? Second point that we learn from the life of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam is from his dua. This is the final messenger, and he's making dua, supplication to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allahumma inni as'aluka ilman nafi'ah. Oh Allah, I seek knowledge that is beneficial. Wa a'udhu bika min ilmin la yanfa', and I seek your protection from knowledge that is not beneficial. In the whole of Islamic literature, you will not find a separation of knowledge as this is secular knowledge and this is religious knowledge. It doesn't exist. The only separation that we find is knowledge that is beneficial and knowledge that is not beneficial. And the obligation of that knowledge, Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi sheds light on this. Imam Ghazali rahmatullah alayhi is 11th century scholar, 6th century of Islam, died in the year 505 or 1111 according to our common era. It says either knowledge is fard kifaya, i.e. it's an obligation upon the community to acquire. So if we suffer from cold weathers in the UK in winter months, it would be an obligation for some of us to acquire knowledge about plumbing so that we can keep ourselves warm. We can come to the masjid. The masjid is warm. People can fulfill their religious obligations. Otherwise, some knowledge is fard ain. It's an obligation upon every single individual. And that is that amount of knowledge whereby we can undertake our religious obligations and serve others. So the purpose of that knowledge is be beneficial. Beneficial to ourselves, beneficial to our neighborhood, beneficial to our community, to our families. If that knowledge is not beneficial to yourself or to others, then that is the type of knowledge that the Prophet of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam sought protection from. So this gives us a clear idea that whatever we do, we learn through that how to serve Allah, how to learn about Allah. Learn Allah through your knowledge. Further, that knowledge should serve Allah's servants. Care for the surrounding around you. And we have a whole legacy in Islamic history of individuals who are alims, who were shuyukh, and they also were astronomers, they were scientists, they were physicians, they were biologists, they were botanists, they were zoologists, different types of disciplines. All of those led these individuals to learn more about their Creator. This is not an opportunity for me to carry on. Today, alhamdulillah, we have three great individuals, two young gentlemen who are going to share their experiences with us of going through the Oxford application process right through the graduation and beyond. Brother Ibrahim Khan and Brother Mohsin Patel. Mohsin is a Boltonian, lives locally, and Brother Ibrahim has traveled, mashallah, today from Stoke-on-Trent, and they're going to share with us. They're both graduates of Oxford University, graduates in corporate law, and they are trainees in corporate law. We also have with us the Assistant Vice Chancellor, Dr. Ibrahim Adia of University of Bolton, who has a great extensive experience in the field of education. His PhD, in fact, was in education policy. So today's session is us benefiting from their experience, their knowledge, and understand if our child is an individual for whom we wish and aspire that he goes on to Oxford or perhaps other universities, then what is the process? How can we also maintain our relationship with Allah and ensure that the child is adhering to our faith? And those values which we teach at home, we teach in madrasa, are not lost whilst acquiring an education. And at the other end, this child knows that there is a goal. And the goal of that education is to serve mankind and to please Allah through serving mankind. So today, inshallah, I shall invite these brothers to go through their presentation. And after their presentation will probably be the best of an hour. There will be an opportunity for question and answers. Sisters are invited to send their questions up to the front. And inshallah, both brothers, Brother Mohsin and Brother Ibrahim, along with Dr. Ibrahim, will shed light in light of their experiences. Brother Ibrahim and Brother Mohsin, can you please come forward? Jazakumullah.
Bismillah, walhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalam ala rasulillah, amma ba'd. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. It's fantastic to be here and alhamdulillah see so many different age groups, because this presentation is not just aimed at youngsters or parents, it's aimed at all of us. And there's things in this presentation that inshallah will benefit all of us. And the second thing I'd like to say is, alhamdulillah, Moulana Chandia, his words really are the khulasa of what we're trying to get at. And the rest of this presentation really is just a footnote onto that. It's a highlight and it's an elaboration on what has already been said. Because what was said was Kalamullah and Kalam Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And that's what we go back to every single time. So I should introduce myself. My name's Ibrahim. I did PPE, Philosophy, Politics and Economics at Oxford, Brasenose College. I grew up in the Northeast, in Stockton-on-Tees, Middlesbrough area, if you guys know that area. And then I graduated in 2013. And alhamdulillah, I'm working now as a corporate lawyer. So that's roughly my background. And a fun fact about me, in the light of especially the events of today, the tragic events of today at Edgbaston, where Pakistan lost to England. A fun fact about me is I used to play county cricket as a youngster. So that loss is very close to my heart. So forgive me if I get upset at any point today. Let's start with this. So this is probably not a start you're normally used to, but bear with me. I want you to imagine that you are the head of the UK prison service. right? So you're sat there in your office and you have a decision now that comes to you. What do you do about this decision? What's the question? Do you, as a head of the prison service, give omega-3 tablets? Omega-3 tablets are tablets that help you in your health. They give you some vitamins. They improve your health a little bit. They don't make you a Superman. They just make it better for you to get along with life. So the question now in front of you is, do you give these omega-3 tablets to the prisoners or not? That's the question. What do you think? Over to you. You're nodding. Why? Why do you think that? Go on. Fantastic, fantastic. Jazakallah khair, brother. So he said that we want, so why not give these omega-3 tablets to prisoners? So his starting point was saying that we should give omega-3 tablets to prisoners. And the reason why we should do that was really important. He said, so that they can reform. Does anyone else have other views about that? Maybe you agree, but you have different reasons for why you should give them. What do you think? So yes or a no? Go with your gut instinct. There's no actually right answer here. What do you think, Mohsin?
I agree with the brother there. Why?
Why?
There's no good reason to deny them.
All right, well, if I come back to you and say, aren't these prisoners there to be punished in the first place? Why not give them ice cream at the same time? Why not give them a Versace Armani suit as well at the same time? What do you think?
Say that that would be rehabilitation rather than punishment. So it's about what's going to aid that process of rehabilitation and not indulging them necessarily. That's something that's going to aid that process.
Fair enough. And do you think that giving omega-3 tablets, giving the fact that omega-3 tablets to these prisoners, do you think it's actually going to help them? Do you think making them slightly healthier is going to be linked to them being better people when they leave?
It might increase their overall well-being in prison.
Okay.
It might help them to get along better with other cellmates. It might encourage them to take up pursuits in prison, scholarly pursuits perhaps, and all of that then sort of might lead towards better integration into society.
Okay. And what's the balance then? How much help do you give them? Do you give them a laptop? Do you give free laptop? Anyone up for that? Go to prison, get a free laptop?
I think there's a balance to be had because the prison is a public service. So we need to look at the purse strings of local authorities and so on, and balance facilitation of rehabilitation against the hit in the pocket, effectively. And that's a difficult decision.
Fair enough. There is a point to all of this. You're thinking, what? We didn't come here to find out about the prison service. Don't worry, there is a point. Anyone have any other ideas? Disagree, agree? Especially the youngsters. Just think of it as a classroom question, citizenship studies. You've got asked this question, what do you do? What do you say? Do you give it to the prisoners? Do you not give it to the prisoners? Fantastic, fantastic. So what I liked about the two brothers that answered and Mohsin's answer is that they gave reasons why. And they understood what was going on at the heart of this question. And let me tell you where I found out about this question. When I first walked in as a 17-year-old kid into Oxford for my interview, this was the very first question they asked me. So what you guys just answered really was an Oxford interview question. And it's actually not that difficult if you know how to think about it. And the key things here, as the brothers pointed out, is weighing up retribution versus rehabilitation. So what is the purpose of prison? Is it rehab or is it retribution? And then you come down and decide either way. So let's move on.
Okay, so Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. I should introduce myself firstly. As I've said, my name is Mohsin Patel. Like Ibrahim, Oxford graduate. We're actually friends from Oxford. I'm a local lad, so born and bred here. Went to Bolton School locally, and then on to Oxford to study modern languages. Apologies. On to Oxford to study modern languages, and then somehow ended up in the same sort of career path as Ibrahim in corporate law. But I guess that's not really the point here in terms of where I've ended up. The point is how I got there, and also to an extent why we're here and why we actually care about the process of Muslims, young Muslims, going on to places like Oxford, Cambridge, and other elite universities. We're not sort of limiting ourselves to Oxford here. And I guess the reason for that is sort of summed up in these 4 points here that we have on the slide. I'm just going to ask you a quick question. And it's not going to be an interrogation like Ibrahim gave. It's just going to be a very quick show of hands. So who amongst you, we're at the dawn of the new football season right now, but this time last year, who amongst you predicted that Leicester City would win the league? Hands up if you predicted that. Nobody, right? Nobody ever predicted that Leicester City, in fact, they were tipped to be relegated rather than even getting anywhere close to the top half of the table, would ever win the title. Now, you might be thinking, why am I bringing this up? This is a talk about Oxford. Where does Leicester City and football come into it? But the point is, the lessons we can learn from Leicester City winning the Premiership title, okay? So the first point there, the Ummah is a team sport. Now, Leicester City are not made up of superb individuals. There are a couple of players who did exceptionally well, but they weren't £100 million Paul Pogbas, We're talking about people that pitched in together, they worked for each other, and as a result of those performances, they achieved a really quite phenomenal goal at the end of it, which was winning the Premiership title. And I think that our Ummah works in a similar way, and our local communities work in a similar way. So we have people who, we've got some really good individual stars, but the point of the local community is that we all pitch in together, we all facilitate one another, and that's what gives us success as a body of people and as a body of Muslims. And that leads on nicely onto the second point, that, as I've just touched upon, there are some people who have within our Muslim community some superb talent. We've just heard Moulana Chandia Sahab, a superb talent within our community, for example. But that's an example of somebody that's put something back into the community and given something back for the benefit of the community. Where I think we're going wrong is we've got people of really good individual talent, but they're not putting anything back into the community. And on the other side of the spectrum, we have people who are really, really good, really, really talented, but they don't go on to achieve what they might have achieved had they applied themselves, been dedicated, had a plan. And perhaps we are at fault for that as well, because we don't have a system in place to facilitate people like that and to nurture young Muslims through to achieve the very best in society.
So moving on to the third point, Muslims can succeed. I was on holiday recently, as some of you might have been, to Spain, southern Spain, Andalusia, Cordoba, Granada, all of that area, and the remarkable legacy that Muslims left there. And when we go to the airports and we see signs in whatever language of that country that we are visiting, and we see signs in English. There's a reason for that, because everyone speaks English. English is the lingua franca of the world. It's the language everyone speaks. English is the language people learn for education because knowledge is kept in English. People come to the UK to study in English. Well, at that time, in 7th century, 8th century, 9th century, the golden era of the Muslim empire. People used to study Arabic so they could access knowledge. People used to come to the Muslim lands so they could understand an education, not just about deen, but about dunya as well. And even in our current day and age, we have people who are remarkably successful. We have really prominent Muslim figures who have done well and who to some extent give back to the Muslim community. People like, many of you will have heard of the debate Mehdi Hassan he did at Oxford Union, where he argued that Muslims are not terrorists and Islam has nothing to do with terrorism. People like that. And there's many examples like this. Muhammad Ali, the boxer who recently died, incredible talent. He succeeded. A man closer to my heart, Moin Ali, today, even though he was on the wrong side, he was really, really successful today. He became man of the match. And you have people in even politics. You may not agree with all of what he says, but Sadiq Khan, he's got to London Mayor and he is a Muslim. So there are people who can succeed. So that's something we should never ever think, oh no, we can't make it. We absolutely can. And why do we need to make it? This is a really important point. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, He says, "Ud'u ila sabili rabbik bil hikmah wal maw'idati al hasana wajadilhum billati hi ahsan." He says, with an enjoyment, with a command, with a fi'l amr, he says, you call to the path of your Lord. You call to Islam with hikmah and a kind and clever argument. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He says in the Quran that the people who are the muflihun, the most successful ones, they are the ones who enjoin good and forbid evil. Now, think about that for a second. How are we supposed to do that in the current day and age? And how did Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam do it in that day and age? People listened to Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam when he stood up on the mountain and he said, Ya Sabaha, and gathered everyone together. And he said that I am warning you of the hellfire. I am telling you of Jannah. I am telling you of Islam. When he said that, people listened to him. Why? Because he was a leader in the community. Because he had a track record in business. Because he was a trustworthy person in that community. He had integrity and he had value and he had cultural capital in that community. What about us today? If just some ordinary man stood up and started speaking to you, would you listen to him? Maybe, maybe not. If you found out that person had knowledge of what he was talking about, he had actively participated in the community, given back and made Bolton a better place, and then he was saying that Muslims need to take part in the community, or Muslims need to do this, or we as a community need to do this, will you listen to him? Of course you would. And so that's the second thing, that in order to fulfill the commandments that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given to us already in the Quran of da'wah and amr bil ma'roof, enjoining the good and forbidding the evil, in order to do that, we need to aspire to be the best that we possibly can, because that is us doing with ihsan that aim that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us to work towards.
Okay, so now that the introductions and so on have been made, I just want to briefly sort of outline where we're heading in this presentation. So we're firstly going to talk about the Oxbridge process in general. And I should clarify that when we talk of Oxbridge, it's simply Oxford and Cambridge combined. Some lazy people don't like to say Oxford and Cambridge repeatedly because they're so often referred to in one term. So we have this term Oxbridge. We'll then go on to discuss something that's quite important, especially for parents as well as the youngsters. Challenges at university for Muslims specifically. Moving on to getting the best of both worlds, which we'll discuss as Moulana have touched on that. And then going on to talk about choosing a career path, tips for parents, and finally a chance for you guys to ask questions and the women downstairs to do that as well. I should clarify for the women downstairs that there's a paper, I believe, that's been made available. And ideally, write down your questions as the talk goes on. And around 5 minutes or so from the end, there'll be an opportunity for you to hand in paper. For the brothers that want to ask questions at the end, we'll happily take questions from the floor. But there's also paper here. I don't know if anyone's going to perhaps distribute it later on for those of you who wish to write down any questions.
All right, so this is, really quickly we'll go through this. But before we go into this, just a quick point. We're not preaching towards Oxford or Cambridge. We're preaching towards people doing the best that they possibly can to any university that is actually the best of what you can achieve. If that means, not even going to university, doing something else, great, do that. But what we're here about is to try and show you how it's possible to go to a top 10, top 20 university. And these are some of the people, you'll see many of them regularly on TV. These guys, maybe not the most popular people in here, all of them, literally all of them, went to Oxford. And actually most of them did PPE. And this guy did PPE, this guy did PPE. Not all of these guys did PPE, but lots of them did. So even within Oxford, you have a certain degree that lots of these people do. You've got the Supreme Court, the people that are at the head of British law. All of them, apart from two, went to Oxford or Cambridge. You've got the head of the civil service. You've got Stephen Hawking's. You've got head of the Charity Commission. Lots of problems at the moment there. You've got Imran Khan. You've got the heads of the military. Again, all of these people, Oxford and Cambridge. This doesn't happen by chance. And this is just something to think about when we want to give da'wah, when we want to show a good example of Muslims, how much influence and impact could we have if we were in these positions? And again, this is just a quick snapshot, and we might go back to this later, of where power lies, according to a guy called Anthony Sampson, who wrote a book called Who Runs This Place? And in it, he tries to capture where the different areas are where power lies. And again, you can see here, there's actually not many mentions of doctors, for example. And I mean, I respect doctors. My dad's a doctor himself. But a lot of the things that we think about in sending our kids to are present here, are not present here. And a lot of the things that we don't think about are present here.
Okay, so very quickly, we're just going to run through the brief sort of run up towards an Oxbridge application, the various aspects of it, and some sort of general tips, especially for the youngsters and maybe for parents as well, they can take some lessons about these various steps. So clearly it sort of begins and everything builds up in a child's life towards their GCSEs, the dreaded GCSEs that happened at year 11, so long ago for me now. But one of the things that I want to touch on here, specifically relating to Oxford and Cambridge, is that generally speaking, the people that apply to Oxbridge, there is no question about their academic ability. Okay, so you're talking about people that will have a full range of A stars, a whole host of different subjects. They probably do more than the average person. However, I did want to give a little bit of hope to people that might not necessarily, I mean, they've got a really good set of GCSEs, but they've not got a full list of screaming A stars. And how I'm going to give that hope is right here, me. So I have a very good set of GCSEs, but by Oxbridge standards, not the best, only 2 A stars. And I guess the point that I'm making here is that although academic ability is a given when it comes to Oxbridge applications, what they're really after is actually you, your mind, how you work, your logic, and all these different things come through at interview, which I'll discuss in a second. So for those of you who have got, a full set of A stars, brilliant. But it's not the be all and end all. So if you've got a really good set of GCSEs that you didn't think were Oxbridge material, maybe rethink. Then you go into year 12, if it's a sixth form or the first year of college, and usually you'll have selected around 4 subjects known as your AS levels. And year 12 is a really important stage, mainly because that's the time that you're going to start applying to university. You're going to be writing your what's known as the personal statement. It's basically just a document in which you try and sell yourself to universities. And what's really important about year 12 is if you can get really good marks, that will help you when it comes to the following year when you actually need to get your set of A's and A stars at A level. because you can almost get a head start by bagging some extra marks in year 12. So my advice to anyone sort of going through that stage right now or coming up to it is really focus in year 12, early year 12. A lot of people take their eye off the ball then, but the most successful ones are the people that really apply themselves early on in year 12. Touched on the personal statement there. So you will write that when you're in year 12. And it's effectively a document, as I said, in which you sell yourself, you write about yourself to universities. And this is the only document that universities see. It's a bit like a job application form. It's important because you need to differentiate yourself within that personal statement, okay? Everybody applying to Oxbridge will have really good academics. It's a given. You know, you're not going to differentiate yourself by saying, I've got 13 A stars. It doesn't matter. The tutor who's reading it has probably seen that and probably, frankly, doesn't care. Where you can differentiate yourself is actually by doing lots of different interesting things in the community. So, you know, things like charity work, helping out in the local business, maybe doing a bit of entrepreneurship, a bit of business yourself. You know, you're displaying all these different kinds of abilities that 17-year-olds don't normally display. And that's where you can really start setting yourself apart from the average candidate, you know, your extra reading and so on. If the tutor likes the personal statement, he'll invite you to an interview, or she will invite you to an interview. We've discussed a little bit of the flavor of an interview. If you are looking into Oxbridge, you'll see a lot of material on Oxbridge interviews. They are quite famously difficult, but really it's not much to be afraid of. A lot of the questions you'll see are taken out of context. There's a book that's called Tell Me About a Banana. Now, if I say to you right now, tell me about a banana, it's a ridiculous question, right? But that was a real question in an Oxford interview, but it had a certain context and it made sense in the context of that interview. So don't be put off when you read about accounts of Oxford interviews, in the same way that when the question first came at the start of this presentation, you're the head of the prison service, would you give omega-3 tablets? Once you work through it, actually it's not too bad. If you succeed in the interview, you get the offer, and then it's all about getting your head down and making the grades to meet that offer. When I applied and got the offer, it used to be 3 A's. I think an A star has now been introduced to A levels. So I think some subjects at Oxford and Cambridge have an element of an A star somewhere. You'll have to check individually what your particular course requires.
Okay. So I'll talk through the second list of things. And each of these things corresponds roughly to the time period that you'll be doing it. So at GCSEs, you're thinking year 10, year 11, and earlier, that's when the first section comes in. Because going to Oxford and Cambridge and generally being a good, sensible human being and being a good Muslim is not about academics. It's not just about academics. I know people who got all A stars, who were really, really book smart, didn't get in. And I know people who didn't get that many good grades, but then they really impressed the interview and they got in. And we saw at the start when we had that starter exercise, you saw that I didn't want to necessarily put people on the spot, but I knew, Mohsin would be able to take it to some extent. So I threw some questions back at him, and that's actually what a classic interview looks like. So all it takes is a bit of ability to think on the spot and think under pressure. And these are some of the things that help you become like that. So sports. Now, everyone says, oh, you should do sports so that you can write the last paragraph of your personal statement. No, that's not why you need to do sports. You need to do sports because there's something intrinsic in sports that actually helps you become better as a human being if you keep on practicing at it. And it's not just sports, it's anything. It could be something like hifz of the Quran. Now, why is that? Because you're disciplined at it. You keep on practicing at it. You become better over time. You might be in a pressure situation. You might be leading Taraweeh and you might be, you're thinking what's coming next and you have no idea. Your mind might go blank and you have to think on the spot. You're put under pressure. When you don't know your sabak very well, all of you, I'm sure, are not bad students, but I'm sure at some point you would have not known your sabak very well. And you get in front of your Moulana and he's got his stick ready. This was in my day when sticks were still around. And you're under pressure, aren't you? You're having to 100% recall, and you have to 100% think, what is, the ayah of the Quran, or what are the passages of the Quran that I'm going to read? And that teaches you a skill. It's not just to fill in a box. It teaches you a skill. And someone who does sports to a high level, someone who runs a charity or does a business or an entrepreneurial project, someone who does, I don't know, any kind of discipline that he has to a really high level, martial arts, for example. All of these people have something to show for it, and they learn things as a part of doing it. So this starts early, this starts very early, and it develops you as an individual. And the second thing you have is reading and writing. And this needs to happen consistently throughout your time as a child growing up. I'll ask how many of you read a book when you get home tonight? I mean, I'm not necessarily asking for hands. Good, there was one hand, alhamdulillah, as a youngster. But how many of us will probably watch some kind of video or TV? Almost all of us. On average, 4 to 5 hours is spent daily per individual watching television or watching some kind of video or social media. That's a lot of time. If we are not willing to give at least some of that time to reading and writing, then we are not going to achieve the best of what we can achieve. So that's why we need to do reading and writing. And in fact, this is a tip to parents that Mohsin will go into later on. Get rid of the TV and really restrict the laptop time as well. My parents, they got rid of the TV very early on. And so we as kids, we weren't, angels, but we were forced to read because there was nothing else to do. So that's something that's really crucial. Then you've got public speaking. Anything, and this is a key test, anything that makes you a bit nervous, that you don't really want to do, that's a bit hard, that puts you outside your comfort zone, do it. And make your kids do it as well, because it will develop them as individuals. It will make them grow as people. And so as much as we can, we should do some kind of public speaking. You have competitions, Qiraat competitions, you have speech competitions, nasheed competitions, and those kind of events. Get your kids taking part in them. This is really, really vital, and not just for the kids, but for the community 20, 30 years down the line that they create after that. And then finally, once you have the offer, you shouldn't be arrogant, you should be humble and realize that actually lots of people don't make their offer after getting it. So you should be humble about it. And then finally, you should have ihsan. And so some people, when they get their offer, they've actually got pretty much all their grades in the bag already. So they'll be very hard pressed to mess up at that point. But still, with ihsan, try and do the best that you absolutely can. Why? Well, because when you've got the Bolton, is it news? Bolton News? Yeah. So the Bolton News, the local newspaper, when they go around in August and they show pictures of Daniel and whoever, Jessica, who's got 15 A stars and 10 A levels, and they've done really well and they're going to go to Cambridge and study medicine. How good would it be if we had a hijabi sister there, or a brother with a beard, who then said that actually, I did this, and I did this because I did hifz of the Quran as a youngster, and that really helped me. I did this because I did the Taraweeh, and this is what Taraweeh is. And this is why Muslims do Taraweeh. I did this because I prayed to Allah, and this is why I believe in Allah. How much of an incredible example would that set? Not just for non-Muslims and da'wah purposes, but also to Muslims themselves, who realize that actually it is possible for a Muslim, a good Muslim, to also do really well.
Okay, so this slide, I guess it's aimed at parents as well as the youngsters that might be going to university as well. There are some challenges that are very specific to Muslims, and parents are really worried often about sending their kids. And in fact, the kids themselves are actually quite reluctant in many ways, because they're worried about how they're going to come across themselves. They're worried about how they're going to interact with everybody else. They're worried about how are we going to avoid the fitan that university brings. And we've sort of broadly split it up into three things: so gender interaction, arrogance, and philosophical challenges that Ibrahim's going to go into. On the gender interaction point, I mean, it speaks for itself. We're not naive enough to think that this is not an issue for young Muslims going to university, both male and female. But the point is, and I guess I'm really talking to the parents at this point, that from a young age, if we instill in our children, and we are role models of a proper Islamic education, proper Islamic mannerisms, then really what develops in the child is an automatic adherence and submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And when you have that automatic submission, the youngster regulates himself because he is regulated by the Sharia, right? So that means that when he's at university or she's at university, faced with various different aspects, they're actually able to very quickly and very clearly say, no, I'm not going to do that. Yes, this is okay, and so on and so forth. And they're actually able to balance very well the ability to stay away from haram and what is actually permissible for them, and the ability to integrate themselves well into the university and amongst their peers. And then going on to the second point on arrogance, this really is on two scales. So on the one hand, you have the youngster, for example, who, like myself and Ibrahim, were fortunate enough to go to Oxford. As Muslims, generally, we have a bit of an inferiority complex, okay? So we constantly quite defensive generally. And there is a tendency for a youngster to perhaps go to university and fear, what will other people think of me as a Muslim, okay? That might be because he has a very visible beard, like mine, Ibrahim's. They might not have a beard, but they might fear, what are people going to think about my belief? Am I going to get challenged on my beliefs? And for that reason, they might shun themselves away completely. They say, I'm only going to have Muslim friends. I'm going to live with my Muslim flatmate that I know from school, and I'm going to hide myself away. And you have other people who are the more successful people that, like I said before, they're able to differentiate between haram and halal. They clearly can actually integrate themselves very well with people. And that way they break down social barriers. They're able to get on well with John, with Dave, with Michael. And in that way, they actually give da'wah in themselves. Because what they're getting across there is, I'm a Muslim, I'm confident in my beliefs, these are my beliefs, I've got the knowledge to back up my beliefs. And at the end of it, at the core, I'm just a normal guy like you are. And on the other side, you've got parents who, they might not have sent a child to university before. They might be one child out of 5, 6, however many, and they're the only one going to university. And they're thinking, if I send my child to university, how are they going to turn out? Okay, when they come back from in Easter holidays, are they going to be all of a sudden a snob, having spent 6 months in Oxford? And I guess the point there, again, it goes back to the education and the nurturing of that child. So if you instill in your child a sense of confidence in their own identity and their own Islamic identity, they won't then feel a need to take identity from anywhere else.
Jazakallah khair. Let me go through some of the other things that you can do as parents to counter this stuff. And let's be fair, this is not just a problem with Oxford, this is a problem with any university. And not just with university, this is a problem with sending your kids to school even, or to when they start working, when they go to the workplace for the first time. How can we counter these kind of issues? The first thing is the jama'ah, that you should have a good, sound group of people that they hang around with. And in universities, you've got Islamic societies. So make sure that your kids are getting involved in the Islamic society. Because there's that famous hadith about how you will be on the deen of your brother, or you'll be on the deen of the person that you hang around with the most. And that's something that's really relevant here. The second thing is that we are preparing people to go into this world. We are not preparing people to live a sheltered life at home. That's not the purpose of our life, is it? So we shouldn't be thinking, oh, I need to protect my son or daughter from these kind of fitan. You should, of course, try and restrict and reduce those fitan as much as possible. We should be thinking that my son and daughter will be going to school. They will be going outside on the streets where all kind of things are going on. Drug dealing is going on. There's gangs. There's all sorts of crimes going on. My son and daughter will be going to school where there are problems, as you and I both know this, even in Islamic schools. My son and daughter will be going to the workplace where they will be interacting with all genders. My son and daughter will be interacting in ordinary life, online, with everyone. So we need to think about how do we prepare our kids to actually be able to prosper in any field as a good Muslim. Now Rasulullah ﷺ or his kids, they won't have a problem living in the 21st century and going to university. They would be able to prosper and flourish because they would have the sound grounding, and that's the kind of thing that we need to give our kids. Now, let me talk about philosophical challenges, because this is a big one. This is something that is pervasive in all of our communities. It's something that's a big problem for many of our kids. I studied philosophy, politics and economics, but I studied philosophy, and I specifically studied philosophy of religion for one of the units. And I can say, sincerely say, that I came out of that process more firm in my faith than I went in. And the reason for that are twofold. Firstly, we as kids were given, alhamdulillah, a decent grounding so that when we went in to that situation, we had answers, or I had answers for the kinds of questions that may come up. And I had resources to go to find out the answers. I had people to turn to find out the answers. And secondly, actually, in philosophy of religion and in philosophy these days, there's a great amount of people who believe in God, theists, Christians, Jews, Muslims, who will make the argument for God. And there are incredibly strong arguments for God. And why wouldn't there be? Because that's the truth. So we shouldn't be fearful of our kids studying these kind of things as long as we have given them a really solid grounding beforehand so that they can handle it. That's the important thing. Then the second thing is that when our kid is studying this philosophy that he might be studying, we need to understand that there's a difference between philosophy of religion, which is thinking about, is there a God or not? And that's at the crux of our faith. And there is a difference between studying logic, which is also in the philosophy curriculum, but is also something that is studied at Darul Ulooms. Logic and mantiq is something that is studied across the Islamic world. And there's nothing problematic about that as long as you study it properly and rigorously. So we need to be careful about confusing what we mean by philosophy and what is actually being taught.
Okay, so this slide represents probably a problem in many households, Asian household, I should add, probably. The question of, do I become, or do I make my child become a Hafiz / alim, or does he become, or she become a doctor? And I guess for me, that seems to be the classic sort of Asian mentalities that pervades many a household, right? And I guess this is one of the things that we really wanted to address in this presentation. And I guess the point that we want to make extends from what Moulana Sahib was saying earlier on in his introduction, that ultimately, if we understand that at our very core, our being, we are Muslim, we are submitters to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as a result of that, we should, by default, gain knowledge, certainly a minimum level of knowledge that allows us to practice our religion. But then beyond that, we should strive to become better Muslims by actually gaining more knowledge. And really, knowledge doesn't stop. The gaining of knowledge doesn't stop. If you ask any scholar, any learned person worth their salt, are you happy? Are you content? Are you finished with your knowledge? I don't think any of them would say, yes, I'm finished, I'm done, that's it. I'm teaching and that's it, I'm done now. Rather, they'll be the ones that are actually consulting the books more than the layperson who doesn't know anything. And if you ask the layperson who doesn't actually know much, are you happy with your level of knowledge? They both say, yes, I know enough, I can pray salah, I can do wudu, this, that, the other. But they're not going anywhere forward. And as a result of that, they're not becoming stronger in their faith. They're not becoming better Muslims by gaining knowledge. Because gaining knowledge leads to becoming a better Muslim. Necessarily it does. So if we take that default position, if we understand that our position as a Muslim should be to gain knowledge, and that doesn't end. So it begins from an early age when we get sent to madrasa and we get beaten with the stick and so on. And it goes on into our teenage life, into our adult life, and it carries on, okay? It doesn't stop when you start going to work. It should carry on, okay? As tempting as it is to come home after an evening, plonk yourself down in front of the TV and watch Champions League or something like that, we should be striving instead to further our knowledge as Muslims, okay? And if we take that to be our set position, that is our job as a Muslim, then actually the other side of it becomes almost a side issue. This issue of, do I then become a doctor? Well, actually, you can do both, right? So if you're gaining knowledge as a Muslim, it doesn't necessarily have to be through hifz or through an alim course, just general knowledge. It can be hifz, it can be an alim course, great. But that should be our default position. And then on the side of that, we then pursue our other secular paths, going on to career paths and so on. There seems to be this perception that you can only do one or you can only do the other. But actually, very successfully, we can actually do both.
And we have a few examples in this very room, for example, Moulana Chandia. This is a point for people who've done alim courses and have got their kids, studying to become Moulanas. And I myself have studied with, Sheikh Riyadul Haq and currently studying with Sheikh Akram. So I've been a little bit through that process. And I speak from first-hand experience now of teaching at a Mishkat class level, which is the year before they graduate, Moulanas. And I was teaching them a curriculum that was designed to give them key skills and life skills and soft skills that you need in order to function as an imam or as a religious leader in the 21st century. So things, like media training or public speaking or an ability to discuss philosophical issues, these kind of things. And from that experience, let me tell you that if you've got kids who are studying in those Darul Ulooms, then that's great. That's great. But you need to have an idea, just like when you send your kid to study undergraduate level, you send him to study engineering, and you have an idea of what he's going to do afterwards. The same thing applies for these kids as well. We don't want a situation, as often happens, where kids spend their years, their best years, studying to become Moulanas, and then after that, there is a lack of clarity about what happens next. And these ulama then end up working very menial jobs and not really productively contributing to society. And this is something that hurts. This should hurt all of us, that we have ulama who are in this kind of situation. And these same people, if we as parents and we as a community nurtured them from the start, they could have so much more enhanced the well-being of our society, both Muslims and non-Muslims, if we had just given them the tools. So for the parents who do have kids in that situation, and I have taught those kids, so I know the abilities that we're talking about and the exposure that they get, please start early and start giving them wider exposure. Get them involved in da'wah activities, local charity events, local community events. give them as wide an exposure as possible, and seriously consider also teaching them other kinds of knowledge, so A levels and degree level, because the two, when they're combined, are incredibly powerful. And in fact, there was a study done where they looked at priests and rabbis and imams. And imams, of course, are paid peanuts. And when you pay peanuts, then of course you know what happens. But Christian priests, they got paid 26, 27, 30,000. And they were all almost also degree graduates. And then rabbis got paid 50,000. And they were all almost always also degree, they went to a university as well. Now, that may be right or wrong or whatever the issues might be with that. But what happens is the best people rise to the top. People who are offered a job of 50,000 will suddenly think, hang on a second, why am I going to work as a corporate lawyer when I could easily work as an imam, maybe take a bit of a pay cut, but also work hard and contribute and live a decent life. So we need to be thinking to that effect. We need to, as a community, be thinking along those lines. I'm aware of the time, so I think we'll skip over this and maybe go back to this during the questions and continue with this. So this is really at the heart of our presentation. And if there's nothing else you take away, I want you to take this away. Because this is not just about careers. This is not just about getting into Oxford or Cambridge. This is about life. This is about every decision that we take in our life from the day that we are born onwards, every day when we wake up. So the first thing is we all want to get to Jannah, right? We want to get to Jannah. That's the objective. That's the aim. That's the hadaf. So how do we do that? Well, we do that by fulfilling huququllah and the huququl ibad, the rights of Allah and the rights of the ibad, the people. The rights of Allah are worship. We worship Allah. We submit to Him. Fine, we do that. Then, and this is where the career aspect comes in. Huququl ibad. How do we fulfill the huququl ibad? Well, we do that by helping humanity and serving the ummah. Allah's, in the hadith, it says that whoever's in the assistance of his akhi, man kana fi auni akhi, kana Allahu fi auni. Allah is in his assistance. And khairun nas man yanfa'un nas. The best of mankind is the man who helps mankind. And we have many, many examples like this in the Quran and the hadith. So we need to help humanity and serve the ummah. Why is this important? Because our careers, all of our careers, come out of this, helping humanity and serving the ummah. That's where it all stems from. Now, we have 24 hours in a day. We sleep 8 hours. We might have other 8 hours off. 8 hours a day, a third of our life, if we live to be 90, 30 years of our life is spent working. 30 years of our life. That's not wasted time. That cannot be wasted time. If that's wasted time, then we have wasted 30 years of our life. We need to be productive about that. We need to make sure that that is feeding into helping humanity and serving the ummah. And every single one of us can do that in any job that we are doing, as long as we are thinking along those lines. Someone who gets up and he is a corporate lawyer like myself. He goes to work. He does his 9 to 5 or 9 to 7 or 9 to 8, depending on how hard they want to work me. And he comes home and he eats, drinks, sleeps, and carries on. And then the same person, he does the same thing, but he does it with an objective, that I am doing this so that I can advance Muslims in terms of Islamic finance, find out if it actually works, and then try and make it halal. I am going to do this so that I can create an investment fund that can help Muslims and all of the different things that they're doing, and I can find out how legally how it works, trust law works. I am doing it for that purpose. I am doing this so that, because lots of corporate lawyers then end up working for corporations, so that I can be a leading example of a Muslim in the corporate world, which very few Muslims are in there, and I can speak for the Muslims and make things easier for future Muslims to come in. Now, that 8 hours or 10 hours that he spends at work then becomes ibadah, then becomes something that is fulfilling huququl ibad, and that is something that is leading him to Jannah. Isn't that really powerful? And that's the way we need to be thinking. Okay, so this is the second thing, and this is where we break it down. So then we want to help the ummah, fine. We've worked it out. And we're now thinking about how do we come up with a career? Well, the first thing we need to look at is where is there a need? And I actually would like you to do this when you get home. Sit down, make a list of where is there a need in this world to help humanity, Muslims and non-Muslims, and to help this ummah, Muslims. And then the second thing I want you to do is make a list of what are you actually good at? What do people say that you're good at? What are you actually good at? What are the skills that you have? You might be an electrician, you might be a plumber, you might speak multiple languages, you might be really good at cooking. You might have all sorts of abilities. Write them all down. Genuinely, these things are your skills. And then after that, you look at what's the crossover. Where is there a crossover between the two things? Where is there a need and that you're good at? That is the thing that is really needed and you can address. And then after that, you get a list of 5 or 10 things that are both needed and that you're good at. Now, out of those 5 or 10 things, you look at what are you interested in? Because of course, if you're going to be working 50, 60 years of your life in an employment, you won't do it if you're bored, right? So don't choose, I don't know, auditing or accountancy, if that, of course, bores you like it does me. But if it interests you, great, go for it. So look at what you're interested in. And then secondly, you then know exactly what you want to do. So what do I do? And then as a snapshot of all of that, we have this. And so what you do right at the end there in your daily life, whatever action you take, should be feeding into going to Jannah. That's the aim. That's what you do at university. That's what you do for your career afterwards. And that's the way, if you think about it, all of your life is going to be as an abid, as someone who is submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ, I did not create jinn and mankind except but to worship me. That's the purpose, worship. And we can do that in our activities, in our careers, in our degrees, in our studies, if we just think of it in the right way.
Okay. So how do we actually come to this conclusion of what you're actually good at? Because it's really difficult for myself and yourself to think to your own self, oh, I'm really good at this and I'm really good at that. Because most of us find it very difficult to look at yourself objectively the same way that other people look at you. So one way that you can think about what are you good at is to think about what do other people say that I'm good at, okay? So you might be the guy, for example, that everyone comes to when they've got a computer issue, okay? You might be the guy that, I don't know, you've got a hand for electrical wiring, for example, and everyone comes to you and says, you're really good at this, okay? You hadn't necessarily thought of it because for you, it just comes instinctively. But that's a really good way of thinking objectively about what you're good at. And then you also need to think about what you enjoy, because it's no use, as Ibrahim said, going into a career that you don't enjoy, okay? So that's a little bit more easy. You can think more instinctively about what you enjoy. And then when you combine these two things, what you're good at, what you enjoy, then you start thinking about, well, how does that translate into a career? Because not everything that you're good at and everything that you enjoy can translate into a career. It's quite difficult when you're a youngster to start thinking about careers because actually you don't know very much about the world as much as you think you do. You don't. But one easy way for you to start thinking about careers is to actually get out there and do things. And I always recommend this to youngsters because one thing that's particular to youngsters, and you know, older people will always say it to youngsters and youngsters will never realize as much as we tell them, they have an awful lot of time, especially think like right now, school holidays, they have immense amounts of time that when you're older, you simply just don't have that time, sadly. And if a youngster were to ask any older person, probably the one most precious thing they miss from their youth, it'd probably be their time. So youngsters should use their time effectively. And specifically in relation to careers, don't be afraid when you're 10, 12, 13, any age around that, to start thinking about going down the local, I don't know, optician and saying, hey, do you mind if I just shadow you for one day? Or don't be afraid to, you know, phone up a particular firm, local firm, and ask about work experience, for example. You'll find that people are actually a lot more welcoming than you might think they are. And when you do this, so if you do this over, let's say, 5, 6 years of your youth, 13 to 18, for example, what you'll have there is a bank of experience that you can draw on. And you can say, well, actually, I really enjoyed this. Oh, I didn't enjoy that. And I didn't enjoy this. And by 18, you've got a head start on everybody else who's still fumbling around at the career service at university trying to decide what they want to do. Okay? So advice to youngsters, really get out there and be proactive about getting opportunities. Even if it's just a day shadowing or whatever, do that. And the other thing I wanted to very briefly mention was for those people going to university, 18 plus, you'll find that a lot of firms, especially nowadays, they're recruiting earlier and earlier. And that is a trend that you see, I mean, certainly in law, but generally across professional services. And they actually offer placements specifically for university students, first years, second years. And if you can get yourself onto one of those placements and you do well, you might find yourself, because they specifically hold these placements for a reason, and that is they want to give offers at the end of it. Because for corporations, recruiting is a really expensive process. I read a report that for corporate law firms like ours, for them to recruit a trainee and train them cost them approximately £100,000. That's a lot of money. So if they can get you at an early stage as possible, it's beneficial for you and it's beneficial for them. So my advice to people going to university, whilst everyone else is focusing on chilling out, doing whatever, not really thinking about careers, get online, start thinking about the big companies that offer these kinds of placements, go down to your career service and get onto these placements. Because what you'll find, or you might find, is that by the time you've finished your first year or your second year, you might have bagged yourself a job offer.
So just for time issues, I want to do some of the key slides, because we could go on for hours, but I'm sure you've got other things to do. So this is one of the key slides that we think has an incredible amount of impact.
Yeah, so I mean, alhamdulillah, this is a question of particular relevance to me because I've just had a little boy about a year ago. So this question's been playing on my mind before he was born, to be fair, but especially since he was born, in terms of, you know, what can we actually do as parents? Because when you have a child, they take on everything, right? I mean, we hear it all the time. Children are like sponges. You know, they take everything on board. And in many ways, they're a reflection of their household, of their environment, of their parents, their extended family, and the values that are taught to them, and so on. So I just very quickly wanted to run my thoughts by you in terms of what parents can do. So the first thing that I think relates to what I was saying earlier. As parents, we need to be role models in learning for our children, okay? So that means, like I said before, as Muslims generally, we should engage ourselves in learning. And when children see that their parents are also dedicating themselves to hifz, for example, it sends a really, really powerful message about learning and the concept of learning in the household. And if you do that, you develop in the house this idea and this culture of learning and of studying. The other really key thing is to actually let your children explore their abilities. So we have a tendency, especially in our communities, to perhaps slap down, not physically, some things that we don't like. A child talks too much, for example. We don't like that. We tell them repeatedly, be quiet, stop talking, and so on and so forth. Over a number of years, that becomes a really powerful message to the child. And eventually, they do stop talking. And when they get to about 13, 14, we say, well, why are you so quiet? You know, you go upstairs, you just go to your room, you're not doing anything, you come down, you eat, you don't talk to me, no salam, no nothing. You're going upstairs. And we don't think back to when they were 2, 3, 4, and 5, when we were telling them to be quiet. When we are faced with natural characteristics of a child, and they come in many, many different forms, not just talking, it might be in lots of things. Talking is one example. We should do our best to try and harness that trait, that characteristic, into something that's good. So I'll take talking as a further example. Some of the most successful, in fact, I would say pretty much any successful public figure is a fantastic speaker, right? And you can see where I'm going with this, that if you had developed that child from a young age, they babble a lot, they talk a lot. If you develop that and you send them to, I don't know, a public speaking lesson, a debating club, that becomes a regular thing for them to develop that skill, that natural trait that they have. And before you know it, they are, you know, a great orator, a great politician, a great barrister, or something equivalent to that. Because you as a parent early on, you took the initiative to actually develop that particular skill. And the other thing is to actually just encourage them, especially parents of younger children. You know, get in there, be involved, guide them through the process, but also be sensitive to the particular child's desires, because some people, some children, they don't like to be too interfered. You know, some parents are very overbearing. So have a nice balance, but do be involved, encourage your children, let them make mistakes, let them develop their abilities. And lastly, please don't force a career on them. I know we touched on this earlier about, you know, become a doctor and so on and so forth, and the classic mentality, but we laugh about it, but actually it can have a serious impact, because if you constantly tell your child, become a doctor, become a doctor, become a doctor, that's great. You know, if they really want to become a doctor, they can do that really well. But if they're going to do that just to please you, they'll end up not making the best of their abilities. They could have become a great, I don't know, politician. Instead, they'll just be an average doctor working as a GP in the local surgery. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but you should strive to be the best GP or the best politician or the best lawyer, and so on and so forth.
Jazakallah khair. If I could ask the two youngsters over there, if you could grab a pen and the pieces of paper and just pass it around to the audience. Jazakallah khair. So I'll be wrapping up pretty much with this final slide. And that's a plea to you guys. I mean, I'm not from Bolton, but there's people here who are, obviously all of you are from Bolton. And we've talked about how now we want to create an environment for our kids to do really well. How we now want to create a society where kids can prosper. But that requires each and every single one of us to enable that to be the case. What do I mean by that? We need, as a community, as teenagers who are going to be making this application to Oxford or Cambridge or a good university, we need debating skills. We need to be articulate. And for that, we need a debating club. Now, you as a parent who has a kid who is in that situation, who has that need, I want you guys to go forward and ask the committee, let's have this. And I know the committee, alhamdulillah, is very good about these things. Ask them. Or even start it in your own house. Many times I've been involved in these kind of things in our own homes. Start this thing, invite other people, invite other kids, get it going so that everyone can benefit. Be the first mover, take that first step. Because only when we start doing these things, when we give kids that opportunity, we create these environments, we create these activities and these avenues where people can develop and explore and kids can develop, will they actually develop? And so we need all of us to now chip in and bring forward our talents and say, this is what I can do. This is what I'm willing to do. And yes, it may look like a small thing. And right here, right now, I'm not addressing 5,000 people. We're not addressing 10,000 people, but it has an impact. Because if one or just two kids or just one kid realizes that actually, you know what? This is something really profound that I've heard today. And because of that, he then goes on and he works really hard and he's proactive and he makes a big difference. Then all of this becomes incredibly significant. And applies to all of us. That little thing that we do that may seem like it's not going to go anywhere, that little activity that we start, that five-a-side football tournament with the local kids that we start, that martial arts class that we start, whatever it might be that we do, it may not seem like very much, but really, genuinely, it has a big impact. And I think back now to my childhood, and I want you to think back to your childhood. There are little moments in your own lives that you will remember and think that, that was really profound and that had a big impact on me. And it changed the way I thought about the world and it changed my attitude towards life. And at the time, it probably wasn't a big deal. It wasn't a big thing, but it has a big impact and it's had a big impact in your life. So I want you to do that for your kids now. And with that, I'd like to leave you for a moment and invite Moulana Chandia to wrap up and then chair the Q&A session. Jazakallahu khairan.
And if they've not done so already, could the women place their questions in the relevant box and somebody will be down to collect it, inshallah. Jazakallah.
Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. Jazakallah, brothers, for your summative discussion around the process. I think most of you will be very interested to find out about what's actually involved in this particular process, whether it's Bolton School or any other school. It would be nice to have a strategic understanding of the education sector. As I introduced earlier on, Dr. Ibrahim, in my eyes at least, is an Oxford Don in understanding the education sector. He sits and meets with vice chancellors. He's just been made the assistant vice chancellor at the University of Bolton. There aren't very many black and ethnic minority vice chancellors in the UK. There aren't very many from those who are Muslim. And by the way, as a Muslim, it's our responsibility to look after society, irrespective of whether they are a person of faith or no faith. And ultimately, whatever we strive for, it's the pleasure of Allah. So I'm going to invite Dr. Ibrahim to share with others some of his thoughts around education. And please have your questions ready for our brothers here, focused on the process of getting into Oxbridge. The main issues that we have to, as a Muslim community in the UK, where can we add value? Number one, which sectors make a difference and run British society? A book was mentioned, who runs this place? If you have time, read it. UK politics, media, civil service, universities, creation of ideas, the business sector, creation of money, jobs, opportunities. All these sectors add value to society. Within that, the Muslim sector, the Muslim people of faith can add the ethical dimension. Very important, and this is my lifetime's experience, we all need a spiritual mentor. Highly, highly important, particularly for university students. So to understand the sector and more about how we can add value, I'm going to call upon Dr. Ibrahim here. I was going to say a few words, then we'll go straight into the Q&A for about 15 minutes before Maghrib.
Assalamu alaikum. I can see here that questions are already coming in, and I'm conscious we've got about 20 minutes to Maghrib time. So I think it might be better if we spend the majority of the next 20 minutes in Q&A rather than me speaking to you even further, actually, which is not the Oxford style, of course. The Oxford style is a seminar-based style. What I'd like to do, actually, is perhaps just pick out a couple of pertinent points that were made by Brother Ibrahim and Brother Mohsin. I thought that was a very fantastic presentation. And also, actually, thanks Zakaria Masjid for putting on this event, because it really just does capture the social dimension of the masjid, which I think we need to get much better at. So I'm really delighted that this event's taking place, and hopefully we have plenty more of these types of events. A couple of points that I particularly want to pick up on is one around aspiration. And for those of you who are here, who are quite young, who still have university and your careers to look forward to, I think the main point that came through today is actually be confident and aspire to get to the best universities. There is no reason why any of you around here do not have a right to try and secure a place at a university like Oxford or university like Cambridge. You have as much right as anybody else in this country and indeed internationally. And of course, life is getting harder, and especially if you still come from a position where your colour is obvious or your religion is obvious, then of course the challenge is that much greater. But the worst thing you can do to yourselves is impose your own glass ceilings. You don't need that. There are plenty of glass ceilings that you guys need to smash. Some of us have already started doing some of those. There's plenty more to come. But do not self-impose glass ceilings by lacking confidence. Be aspirational, aim high, and if you don't get there, then it doesn't matter. If it's not Oxford, then it can be Russell Group University. If it's not Russell Group University, it can be any other university. And of course, different universities have different mission statements, and they cater for different types of students. The second point I really want to make is the way in which higher education is changing and has changed significantly over the last 10, 15 years in particular. So certainly when I was a student back in the 1980s, there was very much a view taken by universities that higher education outside of the academic arena was all about students having a very hedonistic lifestyle, getting drunk, and that was a sort of cultural dimension of universities. That is no longer the case. I can tell you now, looking across many, many universities, that universities are getting far better at understanding that they have a very diverse group of students. They're no longer catering to just 8% of the student body coming from very privileged backgrounds. They're catering for far more diverse student body. Students coming from mature backgrounds, students coming from different ethnic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, who have different needs. And universities are increasingly trying to ensure that the services they provide outside of the academic sphere actually is consistent with the personal values of students and is consistent with religious values. So again, if parents are concerned about sending their children to universities, then rest assured that as long as the brothers have already said, your children have got the fundamentals of Imam, and then I'm pretty confident that they can find the right kind of groupings, the right kind of activities, which will allow them to maintain their faith, but also integrate and prepare for the world of work, where of course you have to integrate. You can't live in a bubble. So those are sort of a number of my key messages. I don't think I should say any more because we've only got 15 minutes left, but I'm very keen to see what the questions are, and I'm happy to respond if there are any that are appropriate for me to respond to. Thank you, Dr. Chandia.
Okay, first question. We have a question. When you say as long as they have a good philosophical sound grounding or upbringing, what does this include? Ibrahim, do you want to shed light on this?
Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wa salam ala rasulullah ma ba'd. So this is a very broad area, but very, very briefly, there are some key questions that Muslim kids need to be aware of, especially if they're studying this. Now, usually you wouldn't necessarily want your kids to be delving into these philosophical, daldal, they call it in Urdu, quagmires and quicksand, which you can lead to all sorts of problems. But we are living in a society where it's happening anyway. Our kids are faced with that kind of question and with those kind of challenges. So what specifically are the things that we need to address? Number one, I would recommend to you any books by a man called Richard Swinburne. He's a really leading Christian theologian and philosopher. He's got some really good arguments for God from a philosophical perspective. You should be thinking about, why do you actually believe in God, and thinking about the arguments that you have for why that's the case. Also, more fundamentally, try and find a local scholar, and if not, if you can't find a local scholar, then look online, and I can recommend you some scholars that I think are particularly good at handling the philosophical aspects of these things afterwards, and start following them and read what they're saying in order to understand what's going on. And almost prior to this, you need to have a real connection with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, it's all well and good to have intellect and all the arguments and everything like that, but so do atheists. Atheists also know those arguments. So it's not good enough to know just the arguments. You need to have a really good salah. When you say the takbir al-tahrimi, when you say Allahu Akbar, what does that mean to you? Allahu Akbar, Allah is greater than something. What is he greater than? Have we ever thought about that? We could just stop there and think for 5 minutes just on that. He's greater than all of our problems, than everything. We're pushing them aside and we're going into salah in front of the one who created us. Now, if you have a salah like that, there's no way really that any philosophical problem will have any significant impact on you. So think about iman and increasing iman in order to address these issues, but also think about the intellectual arguments as well. And one of the ones I've said is Richard Swinburne.
Jazakumullah. Okay, the other question is, what about encouraging careers to fulfill needs in the Muslim community? For example, social sciences. Dr. Ibrahim, would you mind taking this one, please?
Yeah, of course. I think there's no reason why our young people should not be thinking about a wide range of careers, and some of those are more obvious in terms of their direct benefit to the community. What I would contend, of course, is, of course, we should not probably look at it just in terms of serving the needs of the Muslim community. Where possible, we should be looking at careers which can help the wider community too. So absolutely think about careers that have a very direct benefit to the community, but hopefully to the wider community, which in the process also benefits the people from the Muslim community.
Right, okay. Okay, one thing about university, it's not cheap. Okay. A few years ago, the government of the day decided that the fees would be £9,000. So it's an expensive venture with no guarantee of a job at the end of it. Nor is there, as our two Oxford graduates will tell you, the degree that you have graduated in where you were a reader. And by the way, when you go to university, you don't go to study, you read in a subject. You don't necessarily do the same subject as a profession, as a job. Because jobs are changing all the time. So let's get to the heart of the matter here. The question here is, you encourage people to go to university, but yet, if you can't afford a £9,000 year fee, how can you attend university without taking a bundle of finances? Well, I'm glad to say two developments. Brother Ibrahim, inshallah, will share with us. One has written an article on this, so he's perhaps best placed to comment on this. And if the second point doesn't come in his article, then I'll have to add a footnote to it.
Jazakallah khair. So I would say there's two things. First of all, the government is working on some kind of Islamic finance equivalent to student finance. And the second thing is that we as Muslims need to think outside the box about this kind of stuff. It is possible to take a gap year between your A-levels and university and work full-time in that gap year and make an income and use that. It's possible to take a year out between your degrees, between your years in your degree. I know people who did a 3-year degree in 5-7 years because they kept on taking years out and doing other things. It's possible to take that route. It's possible to get bursaries. So I got a £15,000 bursary because I went out and I researched and I applied for things. It's possible if you look for it and you have that determination and you go for it. It is possible. And particularly Oxford and Cambridge, they have lots of bursaries. They give a lot of money that you can take advantage of. And then finally, there are actually scholars out there, and I'm looking into this at the moment myself, who say that actually the way that student finance works right now is not necessarily a loan structure. I'm not sure where I stand on that. I think you should avoid it as much as you can and look for these other options.
Okay, gladly Ibrahim did mention the point. Okay, another question we have, how important do you think it is for a child of a primary age to attend a Muslim faith primary school as opposed to a very good normal primary school? Mohsin, we've been very quiet so far. Would you like to share us your thoughts, please?
Okay, so I think this is a question that probably comes in the question of a lot of parents, especially now. I mean, I think when I was growing up, faith schools, Muslim faith schools were not as prevalent, certainly not of the standard that they are now. So I think that Muslims, probably for the first time in this country, have a genuinely good choice of sending their child to a Muslim faith school or a standard sort of secular school. But I think that really we shouldn't get too bogged down in that question. Ultimately, the first thing is a question of practicality. Sometimes schools are a very, very long way away, and the easiest thing to do purely on a practical level as a parent is to send your child to the nearest school. The other point that I wanted to make was that fundamentally, sometimes it actually doesn't matter what school you send your child to. The main thing for me, and this is something that we've touched upon today in the presentation, is the grounding in the home needs to be really solid. So that means that once the child is at home, which ultimately they do spend a lot of their time there, they get the grounding that they need. You have parents of children that go to faith schools, for example, if they're not getting that support and the structure at home, the good work that's done by the school can be eradicated, and vice versa. There are schools that are very good on the secular level, and combined with the nurturing at home, you can perfectly well create a really good Muslim citizen, and that's not an issue whatsoever. So for me, the key is, let's focus on ourselves first as parents and think about what are we actually doing in the home, giving our children a good foundation so that when they're at school, be it secular or Muslim, because there are challenges in both of them, they're solid enough in their identity to be able to flourish in that environment.
Jazakallah. Last few questions. Okay, Brother Ibrahim, you're a popular man. And it's about your comment about Pakistan's cricket team. It says you were born in the UK, it's assumed you were born in the UK, and you're trying to inspire young Muslim Ummah born in this country. So how can you inspire them when you're showing your loyalty to Pakistan, whereas an Ummah, as born in this country, we come from different backgrounds? Fair question. You come to the crease.
Center, please. Yes, a good question. And actually, this is a question that Lord Tebbit asked many decades ago. He's a lord. And he famously said that Muslims are not integrated into the UK until they support England. And this was called the Tebbit test. And Muslims to this day and age, me included, are failing that test. But it is actually making a very significant point. And that is, as we move forward as a community, how do we balance between our different cultures? So you've got British culture, British society, England, you've got Pakistan, Urdu speaking, and then you've got Arab culture, our Islamic heritage, and that whole area of things. And you've got people in this room who are wearing jubbas, and then you've got people like me who are wearing kameez shalwar, but are confused and they're wearing jeans as well. And then you've got people who are wearing trousers and shirts. And so that's lots of different cultures. And I think what it comes down to is being confident about your own identity. We're not Pakistanis first, or British first, or whatever first, Boltonians first. We're Muslims first. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, هُوَ سَمَّاكُمُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ مِنْ قَبْلُ وَفِي هَذَا لِيَكُونَ الرَّسُولُ شَهِيدًا عَلَيْكُمْ وَتَكُونُوا شُهَدَاءَ عَلَى النَّاسِ. He has labeled you and He has called you Muslims. So that's what you are first and foremost. And culture, because that's what we're talking about, culture is something that is valuable and is something that we should celebrate. Fish and chips is great, right? But culture is something that we should practice and celebrate within a framework of Islam and within that framework. And if that means that, as a cricket lover, you support your parents' heritage. I was actually born in Pakistan, so I have an out anyway. Then so be it. Yeah, he's a fantastic example. So Moin Ali is actually half Pakistani, half British. Is one of his parents is English. So he's a classic example of a prominent Muslim who is straddling both cultures. Isn't that incredible? I think we need to encourage more of that kind of stuff.
We don't have any more questions. Does anybody on the floor have any questions before we conclude and do a brief dua, prepare for Maghrib Salah, inshallah? Does somebody at the back put their finger up? You want me to say? Okay. Our speakers have become dumbfounded. Okay. As far as from a faith perspective, the role of the female, and this was the role within other cultures as well before the blight of secularism, that the female's responsibility to assist in the household to become a flourishing, comforting household, a peaceful household. If need arises, where the lady of the house needs to assist in some form through her skills via her profession, then that license may well be given. This is subject to obviously some extenuating circumstances. And what type of profession is it? What are the limits of the engagement? Is there a mature environment to work within, and whereby she can maintain her dignity, her Islamic dignity and honor, and contribute to the household development, help her husband, and for the sake of her children as well. If we look across the globe, there are numerous professions, even within Muslim countries, where the role of the female is vitally important. If we just took maternity unit Bolton Hospital, well, there's a need for gynecologists, pediatricians, to deal with female matters, female issues. You can then multiply the different needs from your own family needs, whether your sister or your wife or your aunt or whoever has gone to the GP and there's been a female need, which would be better served by a female individual. Then the females in Islamic history have served a very beneficial role. So of course there is a need, and if that need can be fulfilled in an environment that allows her to maintain her dignity. I was once at a presentation where one of the well-known scientist of Saudi Arabia was delivering presentations, going with her husband to Russia. And she was well revered and respected for her role. So yes, there is a role, and yes, there are limits to that role as well. I think the Salat is just about 5 odd minutes away. We should conclude with a brief dua. May I thank our guests here, Dr. Ibrahim, Brother Mohsin, and Brother Ibrahim, who have attended here, shared their experiences, and the Masjid management and all of you, of course, who have attended. This is a necessary discussion that we need to have. In essence, our scholars have never debated that religious knowledge, Quran knowledge, Hadith knowledge is far superior than any other form of knowledge. That's never been a debated issue. Other forms of knowledge are important because they serve mankind. And that mankind's knowledge ultimately is what religious knowledge is for, is to recognize your creator and serve human beings. And inshallah, if we go with that intention, please our creator, we will be worthy inshallah to present our faces in front of our creator on the day of judgment. May Allah accept our gathering and show us the path to goodness. اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى آل سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. اللهم ربنا ظلمنا أنفسنا وإن لم تغفر لنا وترحمنا لنكونن من الخاسرين. اللهم ربنا أرنا الحق حقا وارزقنا اتباعه وأرنا الباطل باطلا وارزقنا اجتنابه. اللهم ربنا لا مانع لما أعطيت ولا معطي لما منعت ولا ينفع ذا الجد منك الجد. اللهم إنا نسألك علما نافعا ورزقا واسعا حلالا طيبا وشفاء من كل داء وعملا متقبلا. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من علم لا ينفع يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم إنا نعوذ بك من الهم والحزن والعجز والكسل والجبن والبخل ومن غلبة الدين وقهر الرجال. اللهم إنا نسألك خير ما سألك نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم ونعوذ بك من شر ما استعاذ منك نبيك محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم. أنت المستعان وعليك البلاغ ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. سبحان ربك رب العزة عما يصفون وسلام على المرسلين والحمد لله رب العالمين.
Just one more announcement. Will the ladies downstairs please do the salah and then vacate quickly because the room is needed afterwards. Jazakallahu khairan.